IELTS Listening, Pretest version NP103. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. Write all your answers in the listening question booklet. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1 on page 2 of your question booklet. Part 1. You will hear a man asking a friend for advice about hiring a camper van for a holiday. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 9. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 9.
Oh, hi, Jane. We're planning a holiday next year and we're thinking of hiring a camper van. I know you guys did that last year. Could I ask your advice about a few things?
Of course.
Well, first of all, we have to choose a camper van. I've been looking online, but there are so many different models and options available.
I know, but some of the options just aren't necessary. So, in the kitchen, yes, you need a stove and a sink, of course, but you don't need a freezer, for example.
OK, well, that's good to know. So, what else do you recommend?
Well, what time of year are you planning on going?
Probably April.
It can be cool then, especially in the evenings.
So, get a van with a heater in it.
Exactly.
All right, that's good advice. And then anything else?
Well, we did have one problem with our van. The television was unreliable, and I've heard other people say the same thing, but everything else was fine.
And, anything else I should think about?
Well, if the weather's fine, it's nice to be able to sit outside. Our van had some chairs which could be stored under the bed. That way we could sit out when we wanted to.
Well, that's a nice idea. So then, did you book your van online or what?
We used an agent, Jonathan Simpson. It might be worth getting in touch with him. He can help you choose the right van and get a good deal. Do you want his number? I've got his card here.
Yes, please.
So it's 0274 936 2815.
Great, thanks. And then, in terms of actually travelling around in our camper van, what should we look out for?
Well, the price of petrol really varies, depending where you buy it. The cheapest we found was $2.05 a litre. But we heard of people paying over $2.60 for a litre. We never paid that much, but in one place for us it was $2.40, and that can make a big difference to your overall costs.
Right, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Any other unexpected costs?
Well, there's Campbelltown. It's a lovely place, but just remember it's on an island.
Oh, do you have to pay for the bridge or something?
There isn't one, that's the point. Just the ferry, and they charge a lot for a camper van.
Oh, right. So then, in general terms, how far do you think we should aim to drive in a day?
Well, the roads are good. I mean, some people drive 500 kilometres in a day, but I wouldn't recommend it.
So what, maybe no more than 350?
Still too tiring. I'd say 275 as the upper limit.
OK, I guess the kids will get bored if we go any further.
Definitely. You want to get out of the van as much as possible. Which reminds me, try and get a van with a rack on the roof.
Why's that?
You can rent bikes when you get there. They can go on top of the van when you're driving. then use them to explore local areas.
That's a good idea.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 10 to 13. Now listen and answer questions 10 to 13.
Okay, so what are some of the places we should go to? Any campsites you'd recommend?
Our favourites were the Kia holiday parks. They have all the usual facilities.
Like a laundry and so on.
Exactly. But they also provide a gym for guests to use. It's a great way to relax at the end of the day.
Nice.
And there's Jack's Point. That's a great campground.
Oh, is that the one you see in all the photos next to the really spectacular lake?
That's right.
Okay, we'll be sure to go there.
Yeah, not to be missed. Then, something that's less well known is at Martin. We found it quite by chance, and I think your children would love it. In the park, there are all these puzzles kids can work on. They're really imaginative and will keep the kids busy for hours.
That sounds interesting. I've made a note of that. Then I also read about a craft market. I think it was at a place called Rain something. Is that right?
Yeah, Rainwood. It's definitely worth a visit. You spell that Raynewode.
Great. And then one other thing I'd just like to ask.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1. Part 2. You will hear the organizer of an orienteering event for high school students talking to a group of parents. First, you have some time to look at questions 14 to 20. Now listen carefully and answer questions 14 to 20.
Hello, my name's Michelle, and I'm organising this year's high school orienteering event. If you aren't sure what orienteering involves, participants look at a specially designed map and use it to follow a route. As they race, they have to locate a series of checkpoints along the way, and do this in under 90 minutes. This year, we've slightly changed the route. What with all the recent rain, some areas along our usual route are now very muddy, and we don't want competitors having to go through them. The course is already difficult enough. But participants will still have to pay attention to traffic because we can't close any roads for this event. Now, what about entry requirements? Many participants will have done this event before, perhaps with an older sister or brother, or even running with a parent to give them encouragement. But for some younger participants, it'll be their first time. For confident kids, there's the option to do the event solo, but most competitors prefer to do it as a team rather than by themselves. Obviously, there are rules that apply during the event. Like I said, there's a series of checkpoints that the participants have to find. It doesn't matter which they do first. They can walk or run, but there are no bikes this year, so the race has to be completed on foot. Of course, competitors are permitted to have phones with them, in case they need help of any kind. So, the event is this Saturday. Registration finishes Friday, so we'll have a list of the competitors' names already. We'll have teachers directing participants where to go for the starting line of the race, but I will need some assistance with handing out maps. That's 1 copy per person, not just a team, so if parents can help with that, fantastic. We always have food at the event. The competitors are hungry after the race, and it's a good way of raising money for the school. So if anyone can make some simple cakes or cookies, I'd really appreciate that, because we're not hiring outside caterers this year. We will have drinks on sale, though, which the school is organising. Now, we need some parents to volunteer to be marshals at each checkpoint. It's up to the participants to look at the information they've been given and find their way around the course, so don't help them with that, please. But if you see that participants are running out of time, do encourage them to go a bit faster. That's quite important. Any minor injuries, cuts or sprains, call me and I'll send someone to the checkpoint to deal with it. If you volunteer as a marshal, I do have some advice for you. You'll probably be at the same checkpoint for the duration of the event, and you don't want to be on your feet all that time. I suggest you bring along a camping chair or something similar. Once the event gets going, you'll be pretty busy. If you're thinking it might be an opportunity to relax and look at the newspaper, think again.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen and answer questions 21 to 26.
Okay, let's look at a plan showing some of the checkpoints where we still need marshals. So you can see the school is at the top, with Ellis Road going past the school, and Victoria Road also marked on the plan. Let's start with the refreshments checkpoint. So, near the golf course, you can see the junction of Ellis Road and Victoria Road. The refreshments checkpoint is right at that junction. And we'll definitely need 2 or 3 marshals there to hand out bottles of water. Queen's Wharf is another checkpoint where we still need volunteers. From school, the quickest way to get there is to cross Ellis Road and take the footpath through the trees. And at the end of the footpath, right out on the point, is Queen's Wharf. Cambria Gardens. If you're unfamiliar with the area, you'll see there are 2 hills. Find the hill which is nearest to a wharf, and then Cambria Gardens is on the northern side of that hill. Not a bad place to spend a couple of hours. The checkpoint at the Flagstaff needs a marshal too. At the eastern end of Victoria Road, you can see a footpath. It goes in a loop. Let's say you walk round that loop in a clockwise direction, you'd walk past the lighthouse, and then you'd get to the Flagstaff. The Ocean View checkpoint is in a great location. See that little footpath on Victoria Road that goes south and takes you past a wooded area? Ocean View is there, between the trees and the sea. Lastly, the halfway point. You've got that hill between Ellis Road and Victoria Road. From the hill, halfway point is to the northeast, the nearest checkpoint to the golf course. Please follow these instructions.
That is the end of Part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 2. Part 3. Following instructions from their tutor, you will hear two social studies students called Andy and Hannah talking about their assignment on unaffordable housing in New Zealand. First, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 33. Now listen carefully and answer questions 27 to 33.
OK, we've been looking at the housing situation in New Zealand. It's clear that for many people, housing is becoming unaffordable. To prepare for your assignment, discuss the key issues regarding this trend.
Shall we work together, Andy?
Sure, Hannah. Let's start with the statistics for home ownership.
Okay.
I'd assumed that the figures had been falling steadily for decades, but in fact, between the 1950s and 1990s, the rate increased significantly. It's only since then that the rate has fallen, so today it's roughly the same as it was in the 1950s. I was surprised to read that.
Interesting. Okay, then what about the different age groups owning homes? I read a report about people in their 20s, and the thing is, some of them don't want to own a home.
Why's that?
People think it's because they want to go out and see the world. But apparently that's not it. Actually, people in their 20s don't see much point in buying a house until they make a commitment to someone and decide to have kids and, a joint bank account and everything. And many of them don't intend to do that for 5 to 10 years.
Okay, fine, but still, for many people, buying a home is unaffordable. And that means they have to rent a house instead. I read an interesting survey of renters. Apparently, they're always worried their landlord might suddenly ask them to leave and they'll have to find somewhere else. That's the worst aspect of renting.
Totally.
Worse than the rent going up. You can plan ahead for that. And apparently, new laws mean that landlords now have to make repairs more quickly if there's a problem.
Quite right. Then another problem is, new houses being built today are often large.
So people can't afford them.
Exactly. Or it requires a massive bank loan.
But what's the point of big houses? I mean, the birth rate's falling, so we're not having more children.
No, but with a large house, people believe that if you sell it after 10 years, you'll make a handsome profit.
Ah, I see. But with a more modest house, you risk losing money.
That's right. Then one thing that struck me is houses are much more expensive in cities. So why don't people just move to rural areas?
Good question. Many people work from home nowadays, so you'd think they'd happily relocate.
It's a healthier lifestyle in the country as well. So I think people aren't so concerned about having doctors nearby.
I guess it's because if you have kids and move to a rural area, you might not find a local primary school. And once they're older, it might be even harder to find a college within driving distance. That could put people off.
Makes sense. Then another thing, did you read the McKendry report? about the impact of unaffordable housing on students.
Yes. McKendry makes the point that when students are deciding on which university to attend, they also look at what they'll have to pay for a room.
I think that's right. But in the report, McKendry also claims that the availability of housing on campus is very limited. I think he's got that wrong, actually.
Yes, perhaps in the past that was true, and lots of students lived with their parents as a result. But nowadays, universities are building a lot of new apartments.
Exactly.
Now, what about this trend of building tiny houses?
Yes, interesting. These new tiny houses are cheap to build. So is this the answer?
Well, they're only suitable for single people and couples, not those with families.
I think tiny houses go some way towards addressing the issue of affordability, but they're not the complete answer.
Yeah, in the decades ahead, though, tiny houses have some potential.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 34 to 39. Now listen and answer questions 34 to 39.
So, let's talk through the issues related to building a tiny home.
Like sourcing building materials.
Well, apparently people often search through old buildings that are going to be demolished. They remove wood and tiles and use them for their tiny home.
To reduce expenses. Clever.
Exactly. Then, there are those videos about construction. They're online. They're for people who want to build a tiny home but don't have building experience.
Well, I read that many of those videos are unreliable. They suggest using materials and techniques that can result in problems later on.
Like what?
Using the wrong type of metal for the frame. If it's not strong enough, it won't support the roof for long.
Oh, okay. Then another issue is the option of recruiting other people to help out, like friends who've had proper construction jobs.
That'd save time, right? Because they could tell you exactly what to do and lend you the right tools.
Yeah, quicker. But you'd have to pay them.
That's true.
Then it's also necessary to get information from the local council about the building process.
And apparently, some councils can be difficult to deal with.
I read the same. One member of staff will say your designs don't meet the health and safety regulations, and someone else will say they do. That's why some people abandon their project. They've done all the design, but then they can't risk going ahead in case the council later decides the building is illegal.
Ridiculous. Then what about location? One report I saw said people had built their homes on land their families owned, or bought a section of land themselves.
Location has to be your first consideration before you even start thinking about a design or construction process.
True. What about creating washing facilities? There's no room in some of those tiny homes for a shower.
I listened to a podcast, and people said at first they didn't like the idea of having an outdoor bathroom, but once they'd accepted it, they were happy to get creative and build one outside.
Interesting. And then you might get some sort of...
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 3. Part 4. You will hear a lecturer from a zoological society giving a presentation on the threats faced by amphibians like frogs and toads. First, you have some time to look at questions 40 to 49. Now listen carefully and answer questions 40 to 49.
Good morning. I'm happy to have been invited here today to talk about the research my team's been doing into the problems facing amphibians. These are animals such as frogs and toads, which can live on both land and in water. Now I'm going to start with a frightening statistic, that over half of the world's amphibian species are in decline, and 30% are in grave danger of extinction. We have based these findings on a review of past published papers, and we also used computers to create simulations of possible situations in order to see their effects. And we have combined these with the indications emerging from ongoing conservation programs around the world. Now, why should we be so worried about the decrease in amphibian species? Why are these small creatures of such importance? Well, they're the lifeblood of many environments. Essentially because of their position in the food chain, where they're down near the base, and so they're prey for larger animals. And another reason they're so important is that many of them are of great interest to biologists, as they exhibit adaptations which provide insight into many other aspects of ecosystems. Now, I'd like to look in some detail at some of the species we've been researching, to give you an idea of these physiological and behavioral features. I'll start with the midwife toad, which is found on the island of Majorca and has long been an object of study because its eggs are carried by the male rather than the female once they're fertilized. This species is under threat from a fungus, which is drastically reducing numbers. And then the alpine salamander, which is widely considered one of the oddest amphibians. This is notable because of the behavior of its young while they are growing in the womb. Basically, the dominant salamanders eat the others until the number is reduced to 2, and then the mother gives birth. They are at particular risk from climate change. They live in the cool conditions at high altitudes, and as temperatures rise, so the salamanders have to climb even higher. Our research shows that they have not got much further to go. Another amphibian affected by global warming, the common toad, has evolved to hibernate in cold winters, but they are finding it increasingly difficult to do this, and so they experience a drop in energy during the warmer months. Common toads are often hit by cars as they cross roads attempting to get to the ponds, which are their breeding grounds. Also, these days, these ponds are increasingly affected by pollution, which is becoming the biggest threat to their survival. Finally, we've been looking at Latast's frog, which has a very restricted habitat. It lives only in the Po River Valley in Italy, but its habitat is being encroached upon by agriculture and also by urban growth, and it is feared that soon this frog will have no habitat left. In our research, we look at all amphibian species that are evolutionarily distinct and endangered, and we're particularly worried about European species. Half of Europe's species will be extinct within 40 years if nothing is done to reverse the causes. Species at particular risk are those living in habitats which are confined by barriers. For example, those found on islands, where they are confined by the sea. Another type of barrier which prevents amphibians from moving into new habitats is mountains, such as those inhabited by the alpine salamander. So what can we do to tackle the problems and try to save these unique creatures before it's too late? Well, a range of options has been explored by the team. In the short term, we feel the best approach is to set up captivity schemes, which essentially means preserving some amphibians in a variety of carefully chosen locations with a view to building up stocks. Then, in the medium term, we shall be devoting many of our research efforts to finding ways to cure diseases. And of course, in the long term, reducing habitat destruction and helping to reduce global warming by developing alternatives to fossil fuels. Now, if you have any questions,
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4. That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the listening answer sheet. You have 2 minutes left. You have 1 minute left. Please stop writing and wait for your question booklet to be collected.